Support for the program Humanize Newcomers was provided in part by Rose Community Foundation and viewers like you.
My name is Jamie Torres. I am a City Councilwoman here in Denver. I represent West Denver District 3 and I'm our current council president. I grew up in the same district that I represent right now, so it was a lot of joy. There was a lot of poverty, but you didn't really know it because everyone around you was experiencing a lot of the same thing. I grew up next door to my grandmother with my mom and my sister, and so there was a lot of family around. There was a lot of friends who were family around, and so we had a lot of people that made up our entire circle. It was a real joy. Walked to school, friends within walking distance, rode bikes all day, you know, those kinds of childhoods, but also very difficult. A lot of alcoholism, a lot of just, you know, poverty. We were in food lines and going to churches a lot for support and leaned on our network a lot. I see it still present every day, and I actually saw it much more visibly during the pandemic in my district. So my district is still very Latino, it is still very working class, though starting to experience gentrification. And because of that, we were essential workers in my district. We were very vulnerable, very underinsured or uninsured, and so we felt a lot of the pandemic. And so I saw my district really rely on one another during that period of time, which is very similar to when I was growing up. And I watched my mom and her network of the other single moms relying on each other. Social justice has everything to do with the work that's done around immigrant integration, around immigration, around the fight for a better and better performing system for all involved. So social justice is one of the things that I think underlies the activism to improve that system. It also underlies a lot of the work that's done to support immigrants who arrive here under a really broken foundation. My touch points for immigrants are always immigrants themselves and the people that are doing direct service. And not being an immigrant myself, not even being a native Spanish speaker, I rely heavily on individuals and their personal stories and their personal perceptions of what might be happening. And that's an important thing to me. My background is in anthropology, so I look also from a variety of lenses, including theirs, at the problem at hand as opposed to my own. In 2005, I founded the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs here in Denver. And I did that because I thought it was my responsibility to help prepare Denver to be a city that didn't extract people's culture and identity from them if they came from other places or spoke other languages. And it's because of what I saw happen to my grandmother in her time growing up here in Denver. There are a lot of stories that I look to that tell me a little bit more about what direction we should be going and how we should be doing things. I remember meeting refugees over the period of time that I worked in that office who would tell me their story, and I would try to get them on a path, knowing they'd be on that path for years before they heard back about a particular visa or process or even reunification with their family. My grandma, despite being born in Denver, Spanish was her first language and was disciplined for speaking Spanish in school. And so that set the stage for a lot of people who call themselves Chicanos in the Southwest, where a lot of our family were encouraged not to express their cultural identity, and their language was the primary one of those things. So she did not teach her kids Spanish. She didn't speak Spanish other than to other adults who spoke Spanish. And so we are 2 generations away from her now who don't speak Spanish. And I consider that erasure. I consider that a way of kind of removing cultural identity from a people. And so as I went along my kind of like anthropology journey, it's one of the things that I look to in terms of what kind of city do I want to be a part of and what kind of city can I help build, and one that valued those things was what set the stage for creating the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. I don't think it's well known, number one, that kind of story, because I find myself having to tell people it a lot for why an entire group of proud Latinos and Chicanos in Denver, Colorado Where else in the Southwest? Why none of us speak Spanish or speak Spanish well. I had to learn it in school. It is one of the indicators that a lot of people don't talk a lot about this part of our history. It's a pretty important one, but there's a lot of shame tied up in it too, which could be why we don't offer it up as a conversation point. I do think it's one of the things that also bridges myself to what is currently happening in Denver, and why it's a constant flow of energy that comes through migration and immigration that continues to retell that story over and over and over again. And what we've tried to build and kind of correct course in Denver, that we weren't going to be a city that was going to ask you to assimilate, that we weren't going to be a city that was going to ask you to abandon things in order to fit in order to succeed, in order to find a community or a network. We know one-on-one the ways that some of the rhetoric isn't valid, right? That crime is actually lower among immigrant communities, that they are some of the fastest growing entrepreneurs in this country. Some of the small things that people can do to humanize this issue for themselves is to volunteer. It really takes very little effort, very little time out of your day to take yourself, your family, to a location where they might be feeding, where they might be sorting clothes, where they might be engaging in a legal night for our immigrant population, and watching the work that goes into the multifaceted kind of role of what welcoming looks like. Because it deepens, I think, an appreciation for the really complicated path any immigrant has to face when they come to the United States. I think there's a misperception out there that if only they wanted to work, would they be finding success? Only to realize in a legal clinic, they can't. They can't actually get a job in order to then be self-sufficient, in order to then be able to afford an apartment in the Metro Denver area, in order to then be able to send their kids to school and start on that path. And so we think about some of the most foundational needs that a family has, and to be a part of giving something to that equation is incredibly humanizing. It's incredibly vulnerable, and I've seen families across Denver really dig in and do that because nobody was coming for our aid. Nobody was coming to help, and so we had to figure out as a community what everyone was capable of providing, and that they did. And when we first started seeing arrivals from Texas, the buses from Texas, it was in winter. It was in the middle of December. These were folks that did not come with coats. They may have been wearing the same shoes that they wore traveling through 7 or 8 different countries. And so they needed basic things, and this community has stepped up. And so I think in doing that, you're deciding to help another human being in a path that they're on. And that takes a little bit of courage. And so it is that, and then it's starting to see those folks get angry at the situation that these immigrants find themselves in, angry at the broken immigration system that we've talked about for decades, and start to actually want to do something about that. And so we've seen that mobilization happen here in Denver.